And thank you guys for taking an hour out of your day to be with us. I just want to tell you that the Pulitzer Prize that he just mentioned took a village to win. And it was for the Washington Post coverage of the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol. I was there covering it that day from the morning until the night in a bulletproof vest, surrounded by men and women waving Confederate flags with zip ties and even pitchforks. And they were all fueled by a lie. The president had said that the election had been stolen from him, and so they decided to try to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power from one elected president to another. I saw it because I was there. You saw it probably on your phones, on your computers, on your television. We all know it happened. And yet, already, people in positions of power and privilege are trying to rewrite that history, saying it was just a tourist visit. But we know that it wasn't. And yet, that's who we are, right? We're a country that rewrites our history. And as a result of that, our democracy is based in part on misinformation. Misinformation that erases people. So let's disrupt that. With me to do this is Carisha Rogers, a Houston-based voting rights advocate and leader at Texas Rising, a project of the Texas Freedom Network. Javier Wallace is the owner and guide of Black Austin Tours and a postdoctoral associate at Duke University in the African and African American Studies program. And of course, Jeffery Robinson of the Who We Are Project. Okay, so I'm sitting on stage with two native Texans, one from Austin, one from Houston. And I've been in Austin for a few days now, and I've heard over the past few days that Austin is a liberal bastion and there are no Black people here.
Y'all better stop that lying. Stop all the lying now.
Okay.
I'm not going to start right now. I'm going to be quiet.
No, this is exactly why I'm bringing it up.
Oh, okay.
What's wrong with this narrative?
I mean, everything is wrong with that narrative. Somebody who's born and raised in this city, it really grinds my gears. And I often share that with people when people say that there are no Black people in this city. And usually I think that comes from this idea that I always tell people, like, yeah, you might not think there are Black people of your social economic status. But when I look around this city and see who's here laboring in the position to keep this city running, including who's in this convention center working and the positions that they're working, you can't convince me that there aren't Black people in this city. And then, because we are descendants of those individuals, when this place was 40% enslaved Black folks, you know, like, we have been here ever since, and our communities have been here ever since. And then, like, my mom used to say, like, how can this city be any different than any other place in Texas when we like to say the blue dot in the Red Sea, if this is where all the laws and all that nonsense comes out of? And so, like, yeah, it might be a liberal place for some people, but it's not a liberal place for everybody. And when we say that, we erase the people who have literally built this place out of the ground and made it to where it is today. So that's why I always will stop that hard stop, because that's not true.
So why are people afraid of Austin's Black history? Why are people afraid of America's Black history? Jeff?
Well, I'm going to leave Austin's history to this person sitting right next to me, but I will say about America's history, people are afraid because part of what the truth requires folks to do is to realize that our origin story is a myth. And when you're asking a group of people to give up their origin story or to modify their origin story, that is a huge ask. And there is all kinds of both intellectual and emotional reasons why people are reluctant to do that. But the truth about our history is clear and undeniable if you're willing to just look. And I think a lot of times people have a problem. People want to say either America is great or it's racist. And my response is, America is one of the greatest countries on the face of the earth. And it's also one of the most racist countries on the face of the earth. And those two things have coexisted for a long time. But in the end, one will trump the other. Greatness and racism cannot coexist forever. And we are coming to a point in this country where we're going to have to choose which one we're going to go for. And so I think there is a fear because people think, oh my God, if I acknowledge that these bad things have happened, that means I may have to do something about it. It means I may have to make different decisions than I've made before. It means I may have to acknowledge that there are people who are living at economic levels far beneath where I'm living, and yet they have every bit as much talent, work ethic, and everything else. And so that's a fearful thing to acknowledge, but I think we're coming to the point where we're not going to have a choice.
Korisha, how are you seeing this play out in Houston?
Well, it's one of those things where it's just a battle to have the conversation because we're in a state of time where people are not talking to each other anymore. And in Houston, it's that our city, fourth largest city in the United States, constantly is growing rapidly, and we have a really diverse culture of people there. And so that comes at great odds with our state government. The things that we do in Houston are very progressive, are very built up of trying to make Houston a better, more accessible city for others. But we're constantly having to battle a state government who doesn't see it that way and only wants to keep things the way they were, but we can't do that anymore, especially when there's so many different types of people and we keep failing to acknowledge them and also take accountability. Because I think that's one of the key things that's affecting us right now is that people don't want to take accountability for the past. And so it just keeps leading in this circle of trying to gaslight people when they're calling them out for being racist, but they're like, no, I'm not racist. And I'm like, dude, you are. We're looking dead at you. And so it's one of those things where we have to find a way to fix this cycle of just oh, I'm not, but you are. And so we have to have the conversations and make the framework to be able to make a more equitable city. And I think Houston, at least, is doing efforts in that aspect is because they're constantly doing making more accessible things for Houstonians and then also our makeup is starting to be properly represented, and that is a problem.
So I think often it's helpful to better understand how we got here when we look to the past. And so I want to play a clip from the new film that Jeffery Robinson has done with the Kunstler sisters, Emily and Sarah. They are directors, and it's called How to Rig an Election. And let me just set this up for you. You're going to see a clip about one of the most contested election in U.S. history. And it's not the 2020, and it's not 2000. It's 1876. So let's take a peek.
On June 17, 1876, the Republicans, the party that guided the Union to victory in the Civil War, nominated Rutherford B. Hayes for president and William A. Wheeler for vice president. 9 days later, the Democrats, then the party of racism and white supremacy, nominated Samuel J. Tilden and Thomas A. Hendricks. As returns came in on the evening of November 7th, the nation held its breath. In the early count, Tilden appeared to have the lead. The next morning, Democratic newspapers proclaimed his victory. Then, on November 9th, Republicans announced a Hayes win. But this game was just beginning. Tilden won the popular vote, but results in 3 states were in dispute: Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. Neither side would concede. The nation was thrown into chaos. The Florida governor reported that a special train sent out to get returns had been Ku Kluxed and thrown from the track. Amid reports of fraud and armed threats to black voters, then President Grant, the former commander of the Union Army, sent troops to the capitals of all three disputed states. Just 11 years after the Civil War, it looked like it could start all over again.
Okay, first of all, quite a cliffhanger. Thank you, Tom Hanks. America's Dad narrated that. Jeff, we didn't fall back into civil war, but it wasn't that easy. So walk us through what happened.
Well, what's important to remember about this time is that it was literally 11 years after the Civil War was over. And one thing I think it's important to remember is that America had been neck deep in the institution of slavery and white supremacy for 246 years. Some of them as colonies of the British, and some as constitutional America. And let's be clear, when we went from colonial America to constitutional America, we doubled down on the colonial use of slavery and made it a central part of America's founding document. 5 separate articles in the Constitution protected the institution of slavery. So the Civil War happens, 1865, and the war ends. But I think it's important to think, do you really think that the views of the people in the South changed just because they won the war? Of course they didn't. They were a quarter millennium in forming. And so you heard those 3 states, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. Sound familiar? That's the states that were in dispute. And there were backdoor conversations going on. They couldn't decide who won this election. And there was a commission that was set up. And so there were representatives from South Carolina and Louisiana that were negotiating with the Hayes people. What can we do if you want to be president? What are you willing to insure us of? And what the South wanted is, we want these northern troops out of the South so we can start dealing with these black people the way we always have. And they started negotiating. And what you're about to see is one of the 2 letters that was transmitted between the Tilden camp and the Hayes camp before the commission decided who was going to be president. And so if you pull that up, what you're going to see is a letter from Stanley Matthews and Charles Foster. These are people that were associated with President Hayes, or soon to become President Hayes. And what they wrote is, referring to the conversation had with you yesterday in which Governor Hayes's policy as to the status of certain states was discussed, we desire to say that we can assure you in the strongest possible manner of our great desire to have him adopt such a policy as will give to the people of the states of South Carolina and Louisiana the right to control their own affairs in their own way, subject only to the Constitution of the United States and the laws made in pursuance thereof. Let me stop there for a second. You can't come out and say in a letter like this, we're going to take the troops out of the South so you can go and crush the black population. They can't just come out and say that. So you see what they're talking about. They're using, kind of allusions. But what they're talking about is absolutely clear. South Carolina and Louisiana handling their own affairs in their own way. And they had an established way of handling affairs with the black community. And this letter was to assure them, if Hayes is president, you're going to get to go back to your old ways. And Rutherford Hayes won this election, and when he did, he didn't withdraw troops immediately. They didn't all leave in 1877, but they started leaving. And what the federal troops did not do was to stop the onslaught of black codes, Jim Crow laws, mass lynchings, mass murders that occurred in the South to put black people back as close to the institution of slavery as is possible. And the last thing I want to say about this is Rutherford Hayes had to know what he was doing. He had to pretend in his head, I'm going to pretend that what happened in the past in the South isn't going to happen again. Everything will be fine, so I'll withdraw the troops, and then what happened, happened. And this is the same thing people are trying to do today. Erase the past and pretend it didn't happen, so you can start doing stuff and call it new when it's as old as the country. So this election was one of the most important elections in American history, and we are feeling the impact of it today.
And I don't know if I can add something too, but what you're talking about, Jeff, it really makes me think about, and bringing the context of here to Texas, I'm always somebody who likes to privilege also the formerly enslaved people and what they're doing, and thinking about this whole process of how the South is extremely populated by the majority of these 4 million enslaved people. And because of the labor that this cotton plantation emporium demanded, in certain counties, enslaved people, then formerly enslaved people, constitute the majority.
Right.
And and these people are immediately taking action and enacting on their limited opportunities of citizenship, to the point I was making earlier, Kate, about people saying that there's no black people in Austin. Literally 40% of Travis County at the end of enslavement is 40% enslaved, and then that number only increases. And so these people are going out and they are immediately starting to become civically involved in voting. And they're standing up and they're saying if you read some of these speeches that these formerly enslaved people are, when they get elected to office, what they're telling these white men to their face, like Matthew Gaines here in Texas, he's formerly enslaved, tried to self-emancipate a couple times over his life. He's emancipated here in Texas, and he's talking about immigration when they want to give out public land to European immigrants. And he says, you know what? You're telling me I need to go back to Africa. But he said, guess what? I'll go back to Africa when you give the Native American back his land. I'll go back to Africa when the French goes back to France. I'll go back to Africa when the German goes back to Germany. And you know what I'm saying? And he's saying, you think y'all are gonna give away the land that we literally pulled up the stumps out the ground for y'all to make profitable, and now y'all gonna tell us we gotta go? No. Right? And this is somebody who yesterday was enslaved. Right? Right. And we had thought that this person was ignorant, inferior in every way, and he's standing up telling you this to your face because they have voted. And I think that's an important part to talk about, how the government, regardless of what side it was, have been in cahoots with each other, but how black people were forcing them to recognize the power that we were having in these spaces when given the opportunity to be civically involved.
And I want to ask, a show of hands, how many people knew about the 1876 election? The lights are bright. There's a few, but not that many, right? And yet we can go back and look at these letters. This is primary source information. It is in our history. And that is going to make it pretty sensitive and controversial right now for some states, like Florida.
And Texas.
Okay?
Don't leave us out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's be inclusive. Help us understand the difference between critical race theory and history.
Who's that for?
Jump ball.
Honestly, there is no real difference. Because basically what's happening is critical race theory is just being used as a rhetoric to basically justify their actions, when literally we're teaching like slavery literally existed, and they want to make sure that no one knows about that because they don't want people. They keep saying, "Oh, we don't want our children to feel bad, and they're just trying to erase what's happened because they don't want to take accountability for it." I kind of link it back to what I said earlier. It's a lack of accountability and a lack of trying to improve because they feel the balance of power shifting. Like, we're starting to eventually become equal citizens, and it don't like that. Because that means that more people are going to be more aware of what's going on. More people are going to try to hold them accountable. They don't want that at all. And so they're going to do many things as possible to either make you feel like, hey, no, you got it just fine. You got it well made. I'm like, no, we still have to deal with constantly being prejudiced against anywhere we go, everywhere we go. And it's just like, people who want to not open their minds to the conversation are the people who have the privilege to close their ears to it.
Right, right.
And that's not a reality for people like me. Like, I live it. It's my skin. I literally have to walk out and do my thing each and every day. And I feel it. And I watch, like, social media, TV, of just, like, people being harmed by the policies, and also just current brutalities just against us. It's frustrating to constantly watch that and then have people, oh, no, that's just a separate incident. That's just, no, this is a bigger problem that we have to address, and we got to stop ignoring it.
I will give you an example of critical race theory. It is a historical fact that white people own homes at a much higher rate than black people. That's a historical fact. What critical race theory will say is, well, there may be reasons for that. For example, the entire history of redlining by the Federal Housing Administration. For example, the fact that between 1934 and 1962, the Federal Housing Administration gave 98% of its home loan money to white Americans. So critical race theory explains how racism has had an impact on historical events in our country. But history has a very simple definition. If you're talking about people in the past, and you're talking about what they did, what they said, and what they said about what they did, that's history. It's nothing else. And if you look, there are 44 states since January of 2021 that have enacted or started to study some kind of legislation to restrict what can be taught to our children. And so this is why I continue to say, this is nothing new. This is an old strategy. And it goes all the way back to 1837 and John C. Calhoun, one of the most virulent racists in American history. He was vice president twice. And what he said, 25 years before the start of the Civil War, we got to stop teaching abolition. We got to get it out of the schools, and we got to get it out of the pulpits on Sunday, because if we don't, the minds of the rising generation are going to reject slavery. And slavery is going to be done for, and we will have a war that will drench this country in blood. He said that a quarter century before the Civil War, and he was absolutely right. The mind of the rising generation has always been in the front headlights for American politicians. And that's the thing about erasing the past. If you erase it, then you can do some stuff today and tell people it's brand new.
Javier is an amazing tour guide and storyteller and historian. And I took his tour the other day of Austin, and I wanted everybody everywhere to be with me on it. And what's interesting is, I asked you, and I'll ask you now, are you an activist?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I do not think of myself as an activist. Initially, when I start Black Austin Tours as a continuation of Afro-Latinx travel, it's literally a way to make money. I was a broke grad student at the University of Texas here in Austin doing a PhD, and I was, Austin is expensive. Y'all are living that, seeing that now. And so I was here as a student, and I had this experience doing it in Panama, where my father is from, and I just wanted to do something there. And then because I was taking classes at UT classes with amazing black intellectuals talking about critical race theory, and taking classes like Black Education in America with Dr. Kefferlin Brown, I'm being trained on how to access and give language to these archives and these historical things happening in our country. And the convergence, talking about critical race theory, interest convergence, if anybody's all into the tenets of it, I needed to make money, but then I was also having opportunity to use the space that I was in and connecting so many things from my mother's family that I have heard over the course of my life. Talking to my grandparents, because my mom is from here, talking to my grandparents, talking at the family reunions. I just see all these things coming into my mind, and I just start walking on the street and talking. And I don't think of myself as an activist, but I now know what it means because I know the people who reach out to me. I know the people who come on my tours. I know the power that my voice has. I know the power that these stories have. I know what it means to tell these stories in Austin, Texas. I know what it means to tell these stories in the state of Texas with the current attack on how we have conversations about history. And so I have care. And what do I do? I think Carisha's a hell of an activist. I just talk a lot. You know what I mean? I research, I study, I think, and I take to the streets. But I know when people see me on the street, some people don't like what I say. And I talk louder when I see their faces like that. But besides that, I make sure that what I'm saying is something that can challenge them to think differently than what they have thought before. And so some people might call that activism, but I'm still reluctant to call myself an activist.
Well, I kind of hate to break it to you, but you're an activist, buddy. Welcome to the club. How's it going?
Yeah, appreciate it.
And like just further kind of on this conversation of just like how much like critical race theory and slavery, racism all come together. It's just, and we'll like give an example of the now. Like in Harris County, we back in 2020, we did drive-through voting. We did it's so accessible for people to get out and vote instead of just simply having to go into a polling place, especially during COVID times. People were really nervous about just general getting COVID, because unfortunately I got COVID back in 2020 as well. So I was looking for a way to not go into the polls myself. So when we offered that option, it made me wonder, like, why weren't we doing this sooner? And having that happen, and then having our state government respond in such a rapid fire way of just like, no, you cannot do this. We will shut you down right now. And us having to constantly play this back and forth game of like, oh, is this legal? Is this not legal? And for them to, in the 21 legislature, to eventually outlaw it. I'm pretty sure they saw what the bigger advantages of it could be. Because people who work every day, who have these long shifts, because like we also did 24-hour voting. We were literally making so many progress to make voting accessible to people. And we don't want to do that. Because if we do that, that means a lot more Black people are going to be getting out to vote. And we don't want that, because they're all working people. They're all having to work really long jobs, and they're all coming out during the times of night. Like having 24-hour voting, you literally had doctors, you literally had late night workers all coming in to cast that ballot. For our state government to do that, they acknowledged how much power that had, and they had to make sure to take it away from us so that we didn't have the ability to do so. And that really relates into why I personally get involved in this, is because I grew up in Houston's 3rd Ward, which is, very Black community, and watching my friends, my family, my community just kind of feel powerless makes me angry. And I was like, I have to do something. And that's why I'm involved and very heavily encourage people to vote, because the reason they don't want you voting, the reason that they do all this theatrics at the Capitol is because they want to make it discouraging. But you should always vote, please. Like not even just presidential, you need to vote in your local ones, because that's what's mattering. That's what they're doing things to you in the long term, making it harder in the long term. So like you have to be active, be mindful, and like connect with people in your community and talk and like encourage your neighbors, because like it's one of those things that until we start as a collective getting out to vote and making these politicians feel nervous about their jobs, they're just going to keep doing whatever they want.
And this ties right back to history. So I want to play another clip from How to Rig an Election about what happened after the Hayes deal, in which he sacrificed the rights of black people.
The criminal legal system quickly became a tool to control black people. By 1870, the prison population of Alabama went from 90% white to over 80% black. By 1880, elected officials in more than a third of U.S. states enacted felony disenfranchisement laws, taking the vote away from people convicted of crimes. Poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and literacy tests were employed to keep black men from voting. When that wasn't enough, white supremacists used violence and even murder to prevent black men from going to the polls. Elected officials in states across the South passed Jim Crow laws, enforcing segregation in virtually every aspect of American life.
So when I've been looking back at history and then talking to our panelists today before we came here, my mind kept thinking about the effect on the individual, the effect on society, but the effect on the individual. And Carisha works with students, college students, and young people that I am not exposed to. And so I'm always curious when someone is working with young people. And this is a long and winding way to get there, but we'll get there. You know, a lot of people are realizing right now there's a mental health crisis. There is a suicide epidemic. And folks are looking at the young people and thinking, oh, is it the social media? And certainly that's a part of it. But what is the effect of a society, of laws, of systems that actively erase your history or devalue who you are as an individual?
Yeah. So, like, one of the things that I've noticed while working with Texas Rise and Texas Freedom Network is that our youth is becoming 47% of this population, at least here in Texas. So our power is consistently growing in this current stage. And so now when you're talking to these students and you're trying to engage with them, you're trying to get that system of thinking out of their head that my vote doesn't matter. Nothing I do will make a difference. And like at the same time, these young people are very angry. They're tired of the same old nonsense. They want actual tangible change. So we need to start, that's what we're working on, is currently to build them up and be advocates on their campuses. So we're constantly having events, we're having like socials, kind of get to know us as an org, and also to fight for issues that we care about in our local cities. Because I'm representing Houston, but the Texas Rising Group is all over Texas. So we're constantly in each city fighting for major issues that we care about and that our students care about. Because my job as the regional program manager is to kind of be their advocate. I am the person who's like, okay, I hear what you want to do, so let's do this. Or what do you think of this? Like giving them ideals and also making sure that their ideals flourish. So we constantly work with them because I want them to show, I want themselves to know this is how you get involved, this is how you inform people, this is how you build a community and how you build more voters. This is because you have to let them know what's going on in their neighborhood. Otherwise, they don't know. And in some cases, what people don't care is just they need the right issue to hit them in the head and like, oh, snap, I got to get out and vote. I'm tired of this crap. I need to get out and vote right now. And so that's kind of explain overall the work that we're doing.
And let's hear examples of where it works. You know, where are you having really difficult conversations with people who don't think you can make a difference or people who disagree with you?
Well, yeah, so that usually comes in ahead at the Capitol. So we, every legislative year, go to the Capitol, we testify on certain issues. Because like last year, in the last session in 21, against the voting rights bill, me and multiple students from across the state came to testify on this bill and let those politicians know that, hey, what you're doing is going to affect people. We know you know this, but we're gonna let you know that we're about to get ready to hold you accountable. It's one of those things where each of our students are just getting up there and making their voice heard and making their frustrations known. Because, like, we want to show them that we're paying attention. No one's being silent. We're going to keep telling other people about it, and we're going to keep essentially building up our communities to fight back against it. Because, like, some of the things you hear in the Capitol testifying, especially, and it's just like, that's blatantly racist, but you just didn't say the exact racist word. And then it gets frustrating. Because it's just like you're watching people spinning their wheels, trying to avoid saying everything but what they want to say.
One of the things Krisha told me yesterday that was so powerful, I asked her, like, what fills you up? And it was community. And I want to ask everybody on the panel, how are you building community? And help everybody in this room understand, how do you have difficult conversations with people who disagree with you?
Can we start?
I think I'd love to hear from Javier too.
Oh, okay. Community. How do I build community? I think through Black Austin Tours itself has become a forum for people to build community. And and again, because I didn't think that this thing would transform into what it has become, because when I first started, I mean, the majority of the people who were buying tours from me were Black women. And that was the majority, but when 2020 happened, and to this day, like, it's been a 180. And the majority of people who purchase anything from me are white people. And I always think about privileging Black people when I do right and when I do post something, because even though I know it can get shock value and I know it's horrible, I know it's violent, things that happen to us and we need to know, I always think about the people who are like me, who descend from these people, and try to center their humanity, our humanity in these conversations. And I find that doing tours and being in the classroom, presenting young people with information that they feel like that they've never been heard before, and they feel like they have intentionally been harmed, is something that is so empowering for me to keep going. Because the way that they react to, like, wow, why didn't I know this? And then the way that they send me the emails on the back end. They say, hey, Dr. Wallace, hey, Javier, I went out and I talked to somebody and I started to do this. I'm like, see, that's what it's about. And so for me, community and the way that I've been able to build it and try to sustain it has literally, been through tours, but also through social media. Because I can't be in the streets all day, every day. I have to do other things. And the streets are important, don't get me wrong. The tours are important. But like these stories, the time that I sit down and write on social media and do a post, and the way that people engage with it, it just blows me away. And so for me, that's what I feel about how I try to create community. And I do that especially in this climate, because I'm not employed by the state of Texas. Austin Independent School District does not pay me. The state of Texas does not pay me. And so I have the liberty to say things that teachers will get fired for. But since this is my business, I can make it my business to say the things that they can't, and allow them to. And I love the teachers that email me on that fugitive pedagogy, shout out Jarvis Givens, who are finding ways to bring this stuff into their classroom. Even though they're activists, because still, right? Because they put their jobs on the line when they engage with my stuff and they bring it into their classroom space. So I know what the power that I have by being employed by myself and talking about these things that we refuse to talk about. It does bring people in, and people can use it to edify themselves, educate, empower themselves, and the larger communities that they're part of. I'm just, somehow in this position, and I'll be tired some days, but I just gotta keep on doing it. Appreciate it.
If you've ever read The Art of War, one of the things that author says is look to your opponent. And I hate to use the metaphors of war in this discussion, but I think it's important. There are people who are literally freaking out in this country about the fact that our young generation is going to learn the truth about our history. Think about that for a minute. How afraid do you have to be to go into a school board meeting and scream at teachers, "Don't teach my fourth grader critical race theory," which is a law school curriculum? It would be like going in and saying, "Don't teach my fourth grader applied nuclear physics." And it's like, well, that's not what's going on, but that shows you how afraid people are of the truth. You mentioned before about elections, not just being the federal election. School boards are elected, folks. Mayors and city council people are elected.
Well,
And so if you want an impact on who's making those decisions, you got to vote for somebody in those elections. Go ahead.
just to that note, the current state government is seeking to take over the Houston Independent School District.
And so how much more of an indication do you need of the power of the truth? And so we're talking about community and how you build community. If you are going to have discussions about the history of anti-Black racism in America, you need to be armed. And I'm not talking about with weapons. I'm talking about with facts. So if you look at the documentary we did a couple of years ago, the beginning of that film, I have a discussion with a gentleman from Charleston, South Carolina, and he is standing in front of 3 huge Confederate flags. And he's talking about how the Confederate flag has nothing to do with racism. But when he started telling me, we didn't go to war over slavery, it was about moral tariffs. Moral is a man's name. And I said, yeah, cotton, tobacco, and rice. And all of a sudden he's looking at me like, oh, you know that. And I think what people were looking for, think about it like this, a white man and a black man screaming at each other about racism. How boring is that? How often do you see that? But what happened here is that I was talking to him in this tone of voice. And we got to the point of him saying, when he was seeing that all of his statements were being contradicted by fact, he went to the only place he had left. Well, they stayed because they chose to, because we treated them like family. And my response to that was, then would it be okay if I own you, as long as I treat you like family? And he started thinking, you could see the wheels turning. And he said, in today's world, and my response, in any world. In today's time, in any time. He ended up saying no. Did we change his mind? No, I don't think so, because he's continued to post racist stuff on the internet. But this man has been in contact with the Who We Are Project numerous times. And he's saying, I think I look like a racist in that movie, and that's bothering me. His mind hasn't been changed, but he has had a naked lunch moment. Naked Lunch, the book written by William Burroughs, the American author, and Burroughs said a naked lunch moment is that moment when you have to look at what's on the end of every fork. And he had a naked lunch moment with racism in America. And if we can have discussions, my friend Tom Hanks is always saying dispassionate discussions. If we can have discussions where when people want to yell at us and throw racist stuff at us, if we can simply listen to that and then come back with facts and demonstrate, here are the 15 ways what you said is complete bullshit, and do it in a tone of voice like this. This is one way that you can build community. I'll tell you really quickly. A person in the military, a JAG officer from the Marines, saw our film. And he came to me and he said, I want to thank you for talking to that guy from South Carolina the way you did. Because that man is every male in my family. And when I show my family this movie, they're going to see that you spoke to him, you called him sir, you even shook his hand at the end of it. So are we going to get everybody by having discussions about the truth? No, we won't. But if history tells you anything, you don't need everybody to make radical change in a country. You need a small number of dedicated people. And I think the Who We Are Project, the other two people that you see on this stage, we are small parts of a major conversation that's going on in America. And I will end by saying this: I feel bad for the politicians in the state of Texas trying to suppress this stuff. I really do. If any of you have a teenager, the quickest way to get a teenager to read something is to tell them they can't. And I've also understood that there's this thing called the internet out there. So that if you think the classroom is the only place children can learn, you're wrong. The Who We Are Project is going to Florida this year for an event we call a Day of Learning. We will have national experts, state of Florida experts, and city of Jacksonville experts on anti-Black racism. We will send cars and buses, if necessary, into Black communities so that people who can't get there downtown, who can't afford to get there, they'll have transportation down and back. We will feed everyone that comes by working with Black-owned restaurants. We have an agreement with one of the largest teachers unions in America, 1 million copies of banned books that they have. We will send every young person home with their own bag of banned books to read, and we will invite Governor DeSantis and all of the Republican legislators. They won't come. Of course they won't come. But we will make it clear to everybody in Florida, come listen to what we're saying and understand this ain't critical race theory. This is the truth about our history. And those are the ways that you build community, with people hearing that, understanding it, and then coming to say, you know, what can I do to help this along?
I'm going to read some of the questions that folks have uploaded into the robot. And as I'm reading them and then our folks are answering, I'm going to ask the folks backstage to put up the slides with Carisha, Jeff, and Javier's information so that you guys can take a picture and know the websites of all these amazing organizations. So, but I cannot read it, so I'm just going to have you go back to the question so that I can read it, and then we'll switch over to that slide. Okay, so Michael DiMaggio, thank you for submitting a question, said, if those in power hold a binary or zero-sum perspective, is it possible to incentivize them to adopt policies and practices that are more inclusive? So we'll turn it over, and then we'll go up to the slide for, yeah. Who wants to answer that question?
It's always possible to make people in power change their mind. That's why it's called a democracy. And if it's not power, if you can't change the mind of an individual, then one thing that you have the ability to do is to vote that individual out. I think we heard before the importance of people understanding that the right to vote is so powerful. And that's why there's so many attempts to restrict it. And so I think democracy is undergoing a challenge in America, and we are going to find out just who we are as a country in the next 10 to 15 years. Make no mistake about it. So if you have any question about whether you should be getting engaged on these issues, I would ask you to think very carefully. Go home and tell your children and your grandchildren, these are difficult discussions. Makes me really uncomfortable. I don't have to engage in this because it doesn't impact me. So I'm not going to do anything about it, and I'm going to leave to you and your generation problems that are even worse. If you think about whether I should be involved, go home and look at your children. And I think you'll get an answer that's pretty clear.
And I kind of want to emphasize on how important voting is. So before I was with the Texas Freedom Network, I actually was involved in a lot of political campaigns. I worked for a series of candidates, congressional, mayoral, et cetera. And when you see the amount of money that they pour in just to simply to get you guys to go to the polls. Like, you can't tell me that voting doesn't matter. They're constantly doing numerous efforts to increase voter turnout. And that's just from the campaign side, but like local clubs who really do care about their communities, they're also pouring that money, their time especially, into getting people out to vote. So I feel like that's the top key way to hold these people accountable and incentivize. It's like, if we need to be in a system where if you're not doing your job, you need to get the hell out. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just like, we as individuals have to stand up and hold them accountable. Like, we need to do that, because I can't stress it enough, because it's literally so much that goes into this process to connect with voters, to get them out, to make them consistent. Like, these things are needed in order to hold these people accountable and to get the power back that we so desperately have, that we're just not recognizing and not using.
The other thing you said to me yesterday that was so important, and I just thought, Jesus, like, come on, is we need to make political campaigns more inclusive.
Yeah, I'm also on that as well, because I think one thing, especially for people of color, it's going to be more specific, Black people, when it comes to political campaigns, is that we have this kind of give and take relationship. Like, it's more so, hey, I'm calling you to vote, get out and vote. And like the standard, like especially on the standard campaign, it's more like, hey, I'm calling you to get out and vote. Are you voting for us? Cool. We'll call up with you. You want to volunteer? Okay. And then that's it. Like, the engagement ends there. When the person finally gets elected, there's not enough leaders out there who are constantly engaging with their community after they get elected. And those are the kind of people that we need. We need to be able to have those level of engagements to know what they're doing and to know if they're doing their job. Because like, media is one thing, but like personally hearing from them or having them come up to the town hall and be like, here's the bills I'm promoting, here's the things I'm talking about, here's the things I'm advocating for in whatever seat I'm in, and here's how you know and get informed about it. I think we need more of those conversations to be able to fully, effectively connect with our communities, because I do always think there's a certain disconnect, and I wish more campaigns do that, because I know a few of them do, but I think more personally needs to get involved with doing that, so that we can keep people informed about the issues that are going on around them and why their votes are so important.
Nicole Gillum-Thomas asks, media and corporations promote DEI, diversity, equality, and equity, and here I am.
And inclusion.
DEI. I'm just going to start again. Nicole Gillum-Thomas, thank you for your question. And media and corporations promote DEI while political and power structures crush the Black and brown. What is your opinion on these conflicting messages?
Maybe I can take a shot here. What is your opinion on these conflicting messages? I think, to the point that Carisha is making, to the point that Jeff is making, specifically surrounding voting and advocating and pushing for people to vote, I think from where I'm coming from and most of the things that I do is educating people. You know, particularly through these DEI efforts, because oftentimes I am brought in by companies for DEI initiatives, speaking engagements, or tours, and I think a lot of the individuals there are learning why this history is important and relevant. And what makes it, I think, very unique here in Austin, especially when I engage with folks in Austin, is because there has been so much intentional silencing around the history here that people make these issues that are so large, they stay so large. And then I want them to understand that these things are very personal and very local too, to encourage them, right? When we have Proposition B, on the vote here in Austin, which was about the unhoused population. And what are we going to do for the unhoused population? Should we allow them to continue to be in the street or move them out? You know, when I was at that moment in those initiatives, I was telling people, like, this is no different in the 1860s when formerly enslaved people were converging on Austin because there was no startup package after slavery ended and people needed somewhere to go, and we did not have homes, and we were living outside. We were unhoused people, an unhoused population. And then you see the promotion of these vagrancy laws. Same language. From 1866, 1867, 2020, the same language is being used. And so but when people had a chance to make it real, and when they drive downtown, or many of us are downtown in the convention center, and understanding that where one of the largest homeless shelters is downtown, or the Salvation Army that's about to be closed here in Austin, is in the exact location of one of the earliest black communities in Austin that formed as an informal settlement, and the majority of our unhoused are still black people downtown. I think that motivated them to say, hell, I need to go out and vote. I need to go out and do something. And so I think, and I know that's might be putting a bandage over a very large wound, but I think at the very least, through some of these efforts, people can become more informed. They can understand how local and how close some of these issues are, and make them act and talk about, especially with young black people, young black children specifically. You know, I go down the whole road about how do we even get to the point to be able to make a decision whether I'm going to vote or not vote? Because for a long time, that choice was already made for us. And so I want them to understand, like, your decision to be able to say that you're not going to vote is a decision that somebody had to pay in blood for, just to put that on their conscience so they can be more informed to go out and hopefully be empowered to vote, to affect change.
The last question is, what gives you hope? And I'll also join in the answers to this. This gives me hope that four strangers that didn't know each other a couple weeks ago can be in conversation like this, in conversation with you. This gives me hope. And the fact that the Washington Post saw the power of how to rig an election is going to be distributing this short film on April 3rd. We're going to be releasing it to the world. That gives me hope that everyone will have access to it and can start conversations with it. So these are small steps that actually are a big deal. So thank you for giving me hope, you guys. What gives you hope?
Well, I think a few things give me hope. So when I look at my friends, my family, my community, my coworkers, like the centers of communities that I'm surrounded by, it shows me why I get up and fight every day. It helps me keep moving forward in times where I feel like it's pointless, or like I feel I lose hope straight up. It's these people I look at and I'm like, because they have helped me become a better person, I want to help them live in a better world. And that's what consistently gives me hope, because I'm also just kind of being a big sister for my little brother, just like, hey, whatever you want to do it with your heart, and don't let anything stop you. And I kind of want to be the embodiment of that, and that's why I do this work. That's why I always kind of move with purpose, is because even when people feel like it's pointless, my power doesn't matter, I want to be the shining example of, like, it matters, and I'm going to show you why.
Great. Briefly, what gives me hope are the kids, are the youth. As an educator, somebody who has worked through K through 12 and now is in higher education, it is empowering for me every day to walk into the classroom, whether it's outside in the street or it's literally inside the classroom, and disrupt some of the minds of these young people and challenge them to think critically, and being able to give them those skills to ask the questions that are in their mind. They give me hope because, like I mentioned before, the emails and the things they come back with me with too. After that next semester, and they wrote a paper about something, and they challenged the professor the next time, or they're having these tough conversations with their grandparents. I love it. Even when they say, yeah, we had a fallout, I love it. So they give me hope because I understand, like, you know, they're going to be the ones who are going to keep pushing back. So the young people, they fill me up with some incredible passion to keep on going, and they give me the hope to keep on moving.
I'm trying to take hope from the actions of people who want America to either go back or stay in the status quo because they are desperate. They see change coming, and it scares the hell out of them. And two things that I think are really important. You just heard that the vagrancy laws that people are talking about today, literally, word for word, the kind of laws that were passed at the end of slavery. When you erase the past, you can do shit and tell people it's new, and they'll have no idea. That's the power of erasing the past, is that people don't understand we've seen this before, and we know what it is. And finally, I would say that it's important to understand that action causes hope. Hope does not cause action. If you are looking for hope, I'd advise you to look in the first place that I look when I get up, and that's in the mirror. Because if your actions are pushing toward an America where freedom and democracy is truly something for everybody, then I guarantee you, not only will you have hope, but people around you will have hope.
Thanks. I don't know how to close. Hey guys, that was good. That was really good. Everybody take something from this and pass it forward, please. That's your assignment today.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all.